Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another one of our series of webinars here at Max Technical Training. I'm Terry Johnson. I'm the Senior Account Manager here at Max, and just want to take a moment to welcome everybody and introduce our facilitator, our speaker for the day. It's going to be Ryan Cromwell. Ryan, of course, comes to us from Applied Information Sciences. Ryan's a good friend, long-term partner with us here at Max, as teacher, consultant, mentor, and coach, and really just an all-around evangelist, if you will, for Agile. Today, Ryan's going to be leading us through our presentation on Scrum Fundamentals. As we go through the presentation, if you do, in fact, have some questions, at the bottom of the right-hand management screen, you'll see where the question tab is. You can type your question there, and we'll make sure that Ryan gets those throughout the course of the presentation. He may wait towards the end to pick up those questions. Then we have a couple of housekeeping issues and some highlights we want to give you with regard to some upcoming classes that we have relevant to today's subject matter as well. So with that said, Ryan, I want to go ahead and kick it on over to you, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Terry. So we are here today to talk about Scrum Fundamentals. We're going to talk about how this applies to agility and things along that line. This is in advance of a course that we have coming up on October 10th called Professional Scrum Foundations, where we take a lot of the topics we're going to just briefly touch on today and actually practice and work on some of those things. We'll talk about that course a little bit more, and you can get a registration link and such towards the end, right around the time we do questions. So as Terry mentioned, my name is Ryan Cromwell. I am a team member over here at Applied Information Sciences. We go by AIS. Applied Information Sciences is headquartered in Reston, Virginia. We actually have offices throughout most of the U.S., whether it be out in Dallas or Texas, I should say. We have offices here in Dayton, Ohio. We have an office in North Carolina and some others as well, and we're also in India as well. I have been a coder for a little over 10 years, going on 10, 11, 12 years, I guess now. I've worked on some very successful teams, some very fun projects, and then, like most, I've worked on some that aren't so successful or aren't so much fun to work on. And those that were successful tended to exhibit similar traits, traits that we often align to Agile teams or Agile organizations. And I wanted to figure out, what is it that made those successful? What is it that made those fun? How can we replicate some of those? What are some of the things we need to do and look for to replicate those scenarios? And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I got involved with an organization called Scrum.org. And Scrum.org is the official home of Scrum, or they manage and facilitate what Scrum is, and they work with the community and things along that line. And that's created by one of the founders of Scrum, Ken Schwaber. I happen to have that opportunity because I'm a Microsoft ALM MVP, which effectively means I get to look at early versions of their application lifecycle management products like Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server and things along that line, provide feedback and guidance and things along that line. I'm also an Agile coach, which means I go and work with Agile teams and Agile organizations that are looking to become Agile or to adopt Scrum to become Agile. So with all of this kind of together, this is how we got involved with providing some of the courses for Scrum.org, like Professional Scrum Foundations and the Professional Scrum Developer course. Today, we're going to spend about 40 minutes going over what is Agile, where did it come from, what does it mean, things along that line, who's involved with it. And then we'll talk as well about Scrum itself, the fundamentals, the principles, the practices, the events, the roles, etc. After we're done with that, we'll kind of take a look at what's next. Where can you go from here now that you have kind of this brief understanding of what these two things are? How do you take the next step if that's what you're looking to do? And then we'll take some questions that either come from our topic today or that you've just had about this whole Agile and Scrum thing. So let's take a look at Agile. What is Agile? Agile, when most people use that term, are referring to what's called the Agile Manifesto, and this is a document or something that came out of a meeting among a lot of what would have been called the lightweight methodologists back in the early 2000s, 2001. So all these folks got together, some of the names, people like Martin Fowler of ThoughtWorks, Uncle Bob Martin of Clean Code fame, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland is the creator of Scrum, Kent Beck, Ward Cunningham, the creator of the Wiki, Wikipedia, I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Folks like these all got together in Snowbird, Utah, and started talking about what are some of these traits, what is it about these lightweight methodologies that has made them so successful, and where are we in this world or this ecosystem of developing software, and how can we make it better? And out of that came the Agile Manifesto. You can still go read this and see the signatories. I think you can even become a signatory of the Agile Manifesto even today out at agilemanifesto.org. So the things that the Agile Manifesto has on it actually fit on one page. I've only got the first part, kind of what most people know of as the Agile Manifesto, but there's 12 principles that go along with it. The values that are mentioned in the Agile Manifesto, and that's really what it is, a series of principles and value statements, go something like this. We as this group that got together in Snowbird value things like individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration, working with our customers over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan for a plan's sake. And that is, while there's value on those things, in those things on the right, the things on the left, we value those more. We're concerned about those more because those lead to providing the right software, the right solutions to the right problems at the right time. All right? It's not saying that things like comprehensive documentation or documentation as a whole isn't important, but that the working software that we're tasked with delivering is probably more valuable. And we want to keep that in front of us. Same thing with customer collaboration, contract negotiation. So what kind of frameworks, what kind of methodologies, what kind of tools exist out there to help support agility? Now there's actually quite a few of them. Of course, Scrum that we'll talk about today. There's extreme programming. Extreme programming is a relatively common one, and you'll actually see a number of hybrids between Scrum and extreme programming. There's Lean, Kanban method, feature-driven development, dynamic systems development method, Crystal. There's a whole bunch of these different frameworks or methodologies that help organizations embody those values and those principles that are found in the Agile Manifesto. Let's take a look at what Scrum is. And Scrum is actually what we would call a framework, not necessarily a methodology. It doesn't give you answers or procedures to follow in order to deliver software. Now, there's an organization called Version 1. They provide a number of different tools for software development, but they also provide once a year this State of Agile survey, or the results from their State of Agile survey. In 2011, and this has followed a particular trend that's been pretty common, we saw that Scrum or Scrum hybrids make up a significant portion of the methodologies or frameworks that are out being used in organizations that suggest they are Agile. So of those organizations that say they are Agile, 52% of them are using Scrum. Another 14% are using Scrum and some XP hybrid, which is not uncommon. Scrum itself got started back in 1995. So if you remember from the previous slide, the Agile Manifesto came around in 2001. So Scrum has been around longer than the Agile Manifesto. It was first presented at a conference called OOPSLA. I'm going to be brutal on naming what that acronym is, but it's something along the lines of Object-Oriented Programming Conference. I forget the last three letters. In 1995, Ken Schwaber and he and another presented what would become Scrum, what would be called Scrum at this conference. Then in 2001, Ken and Mike Beadle, Ken Schwaber and Mike Beadle, published the book that you see there on the left, Agile Software Development with Scrum, making it effectively official, or an official framework that was out there for others to be consumed and used. Prior to that, it was their set of experiences that they were trying to share with the community. Around the same time, 1996, extreme programming came into the fray. It was shared, done up in Detroit with some of the auto manufacturers, Kent Beck and a few others. In 2002, we saw the Certified Scrum Master program that was provided by the Scrum Alliance, and it continues to be today. Other people often call that the CSM. And then in 2009, Ken left the Scrum Alliance with what he found was the inability to increase the quality of these programs. He started the organization Scrum.org. Now, all of this whole Scrum thing, actually is predated by an article in the Harvard Business Review called The New Product Development Game. And this was actually targeted at marketing or product development as a whole, not just software. And that's where this term Scrum came from. And in there, if you actually go read it, you can Google it, and you'll find the New Product Development Game out there as a PDF, I think, somewhere pretty easily. You don't have to pay for it. And it describes what is effectively the foundational principles of Scrum. So a lot of that is in this article that came out back in 1986. Scrum and the topics that came out of the New Product Development Game make up what we would call an empirical framework. Traditionally, the processes that we use in software development, often called waterfall, are based on a planning focus or a predictive focused mechanism or methodology. Scrum itself is an empirical framework, and what that means is, and what empirical means, it gets a number of different definitions, but at the heart of it, it means our knowledge, the knowledge that we have today, comes from past experiences. And so what we want to do is take on past experiences, understand past experiences to look and make new decisions for the future. In order for that to work, Scrum stands on top of 3 pillars. The first one being transparency. We need to really be able to understand what's going on in our process in the production of whatever it is coming out of our system, software in the case of most of us. We need to be able to clearly and honestly and transparently look into that process and see what's happening. Everything from people and how they feel and how they're working to the activities that are occurring, the quality of our software. We really need to be able to clearly and transparently understand what that is. Using that new information, we need to be able to inspect on what it is that we've done. If you don't have an honest understanding or a clear understanding of what's happening, you can't inspect on how that's working. Once we have a clear understanding, we can adapt, we can change, we can make adjustments to our process, and this loop continues. So let's take a look at some of the different roles, artifacts, and events that exist in Scrum to help make this whole value chain or this framework work. It starts off with this idea of a product owner. And the product owner's sole responsibility is to optimize value, okay? So within Scrum and within some of the other artifacts and the events that occur, the product owner's job is to maximize the time of the team to deliver out of Scrum and out of the process that they flow through the most value at any point in time. And they do this by making sure that there's this thing called the product backlog is up to date. So they're going to manage or be responsible for the product backlog. We talk about in the PSF class, the Professional Scrum Foundations class, what that means or what that might look like, because in different organizations and for different product owners, what it means to manage the product backlog can be different. The product owner, in order for them to do this effectively and to optimize value effectively, really need to be an empowered individual. They need to be able to make decisions about what's important to people like stakeholders and customers, which means they need to understand what stakeholders and customers want or need. That may be stakeholders within our company, support groups, call centers, executives, other organizations within, like marketing. All of these types of groups need to have their information conveyed, and the product owner needs to go and get an understanding of what those people need. They also really need to understand what customers want and what customers need, so they need to understand the market really well. This is a really a domain level role. Then we have the development team. The development team's role is to act on the decisions and the knowledge of the product owner. The product owner provides this product backlog, is going to convey what that product backlog means and what's important out of that product backlog, and the development team is going to execute on that vision, on what that product owner sees important. In order for them to do that effectively, they need to be cross-functional, and by that we mean they need to have all the skills necessary to deliver done software. Okay. The development team themselves is going to organize their own work in Scrum. If we think of the two parts of product development, of software development, there's the how and the what. The product owner is in charge of, or responsible at least for, what is being delivered at any point in time. The development team is meant to understand and determine how that's delivered. So they may have testers, obviously coders. They may have performance representation. They might have legal skills on that team, or need legal skills on that team. They may need marketing, UX, design. They may need business domain knowledge on that team. Those skills might be necessary. So development, when we say development team in Scrum, we don't mean programmers only. Anything that's necessary to produce done software, and that's their job, is to produce done, finished, valuable software. Finally, there's the Scrum Master. I believe this is the hardest role in software development today, the role of Scrum Master. The reason I say that is because many of the skills that are necessary to be an effective or a very good Scrum Master are not taught in many stages of our academic or our life. This is a servant leader. By that we mean the Scrum Master is not delegating or deciding how the development team works, but instead they're lifting the team up. They may be providing training opportunities for the team where they see gaps or where the training team asks for it. They may look for training opportunities. They will watch kind of from the outside to try to see where the process is breaking down, maybe where people aren't working together. And they may facilitate decisions that the team is trying to make. It's often very difficult to make objective decisions when you're inside of a process, when you're accountable for the results of that decision or a part of that decision. When you have ownership in that decision, to make an objective choice is difficult, and a Scrum Master will help facilitate those types of things. Certainly their responsibility is to ensure that the Scrum framework, the transparency, the inspection, and the adaption of Scrum is taking place through some of these things, that the role of product owner is being met. The development team is producing done software, and some of the other things that we're going to keep talking about. They also act as an organizational teacher. Okay. This is often a big change for the rest of the organization. How do they leverage a Scrum team? Whether that be at the planning level, different planning levels of strategic and vision-led planning. The Scrum Master's job is to help the rest of the organization understand, how do we use this Scrum team. So there's three roles in Scrum. There is the product owner, there's the development team, and there's the Scrum Master. Now if we look at this, what we might say, and we talk about this in the Professional Scrum Foundations course as well as the Professional Scrum Developer course, service of these roles flows from right to left. That is, the Scrum Master is there to serve the development team so they can be the most effective, as well as the product owner. And then the development team is there to serve the product owner in delivering on their vision. Next we have the Scrum events. There's a handful of Scrum events, but all of them exist inside this thing we call the container, the sprint. The sprint is a container for all of the other things that go on inside of Scrum or inside of software development. The sprint is time-boxed, and all of these events are going to be time-boxed. And what that means is that we have a duration of time decided early on at the beginning, and all of the activities that occur within that time box. So once that duration ends, once that time expires, the time box is over. The sprint is time boxed to 30 days or less. That means we pick a number of days. Let's say it's 2 weeks or 14 days, or it's 30 days. Once those 30 days are over, the time box is over, the sprint is over. It is agnostic of what actually happens in the sprint. It's agnostic of what gets quote-unquote done during the sprint. It is there as a container for all those activities, and we want it to be consistent. And the reason for that is twofold. One, we want to be able to get into a flow or a rhythm of executing, The other is we want to be able to use this time box to measure, and this comes out of some of the statistical process control or SPC aspects that built up Scrum. The objective of every sprint is to produce a done increment. What that means is we should have everything necessary that goes along with the valuable requests from our product owner should be done. It should be tested. It should be reviewed. It should be refactored. It should be load tested, performance tested. It should be potentially whatever that means to your team, but it could also include usability studies. What it means to be done with an increment or done with a feature is expected to be done within a sprint. They're also goal-oriented. So while we may have this backlog very long and explicit about the features that we want, we'll often take those and compose those, maybe the most important or most valuable 2 items from a financial or a cost perspective, with some others that are maybe not as cost beneficial or revenue beneficial. We'll put those together to tell a story to our customers. And that's what we mean by goal-oriented. We want to have that goal in mind the whole time we're executing on our sprint. Sprints start with a sprint planning meeting. For a 30-day sprint, for a 1-month sprint, a 4-week sprint, we would expect this to be time boxed at 8 hours. It's going to be proportionately lower as you tighten the time box. Let's say you have a 2-week time box. We'd expect the time box for the sprint planning meeting itself to be 4 hours. And the objective here is to forecast what features or what part of the product backlog that the product owner has presented can be done. We might call those product backlog items. So forecast what we think can be done in this sprint, and then come out with a goal based on that. So we'll take X number of product backlog items that we think we can do. We'll compose those into some kind of story that's a cohesive story to our customers, and then we'll come up with a plan on how we're going to achieve that goal. What you're looking at on the right is the visualization, or a common visualization, I should say, but not the only way to visualize or surface the plan. So we have 4 product backlog items denoted in yellow, and then we have a whole bunch of things that could be tasks. Many teams will break those down into explicit tasks that they need to come up with. And then they may also use instead tests. So some teams come up with tests that they are going to use and expect to be passing to call that particular product backlog item done. In order to have a sprint planning meeting, or at least an effective one, you need to have a groomed product backlog. And that means it needs to be sized, it needs to be understood, and it needs to be prioritized, or ordered, I should say. Otherwise, sprint planning tends to be pretty ineffective. Once we get into the sprint, once sprint planning is over, we get into the actual execution of our plan, putting our plan into effect. There's an activity that occurs every single day, every 24 hours, called the daily scrum. This is a really common activity that a lot of people will call the daily stand-up or the daily huddle. Many teams, even those not necessarily practicing Scrum, will try to adopt this practice. It's pretty simple to do. It's time boxed at 15 minutes, which means it can't go any longer than 15 minutes. It can certainly, like any other time box, be shorter. Okay? So if you can get done with it in 5 minutes, fantastic. But the objective here is to plan our day. How are we as a team going to move the sprint forward today? We do that by asking a couple of questions, either explicitly or implicitly. We ask, what's been accomplished since the last time we got together? So how did we move the sprint forward yesterday? What part of the features did we finish? Where did we go with a certain problem that we were trying to understand or solve? What are we going to finish, or what are we expecting to be done before the next time we meet? You may answer that as individuals, or you may answer that as pairs, or you may answer that as a team. But whatever you do, you should be able to come out of the daily scrum understanding, everyone should come out of the daily scrum understanding how the team is going to act on their plan today. They're also going to ask what obstacles are in the way. Of those things that we thought we were going to get done or we expected to be done before today's meeting, which ones weren't and why not? What happened? So what this comes down to is a just-in-time planning event. It's a planning activity for the team. Now, At the end of the sprint, when the sprint time box is over, this doesn't mean when everything that we plan to have done is done. We hope it is. But either way, once the time box comes to an end, we're going to have a sprint review. A best practice here, schedule the sprint review right after sprint planning is done, or early on in the sprint as you can get it. The sprint review is 4 hours for a 30-day sprint. If you went down to a 2-week sprint, you'd go with a 2-hour sprint review. And the whole idea here is to demo our working software. We've produced something, we've created, we've executed on the product owner's vision, we've been working with them collaboratively over the course of the sprint, trying to figure out if we've done the right thing, what they expect, if we understood ideas. We even, because of the daily Scrum, may have renegotiated scope up or down. When we get into the sprint review, the product owner should never be surprised, but this is an opportunity for stakeholders, customers, anybody that cares about the product that we're trying to develop to collaborate on the future of it. There's a great book out there called Software in 30 Days. It just came out that talks about a case study done with the FBI, one of their products, the Sentinel project, on the impact of expecting software in 30 days, of working in this iterative and incremental fashion. I highly recommend everybody go grab it. I think you can find it out on Amazon for like $17, $18 in an ebook format. I can't imagine it's much more in soft copy. So after we've gone through our sprint, we've done some planning, we've executed on our sprint, we've had a review to understand whether or not we're taking the product in the right direction through the increment that we just created. The team's going to get together, the Scrum team of product owner, Scrum Master, and development team, they're all going to get together and have this thing called the sprint retrospective. For a 30-day sprint, this is going to be 3 hours. So if you're at a 2-week sprint, an hour and a half is appropriate. Of course, this is again a time box. That's a maximum. If you can get your sprint retrospective done in less, fantastic. But we want to make sure that we have at least 3 hours to execute. What you're looking at here is an activity that one of the Scrum Masters at an organization I was doing some Agile coaching at, they were executing this down in Cincinnati. This is a formal opportunity to inspect and adapt on what you've been doing. So we have a good insight into how we executed on the sprint because of the sprint review, so we know what happened there. We also have in the back of our minds how the process that we went through to actually deliver on it. Maybe we did some pair programming, maybe we did some new types of unit tests or new types of testing. Maybe we started to deploy to a new environment this time. Maybe we changed our process in some way. Now we have the information we need to inspect on that and adapt. Now, based on what we find, based on the data that we gather, we want to come out of this thing with an experiment or one or a few experiments that we're going to try in the next sprint. Now, I use the word experiments because that's really what these are. These should be actual, tangible things you can talk about and say, hey, these are occurring that you want to do in the next sprint. It's not we want to communicate more, we want to do more tests. It's we're going to get together every third day and talk with XYZ people. We're going to have at least 3 user reviews or usability studies as a part of the next sprint to see how that impacts the quality of our product. These are experiments that you can take in and then finally at the end of the next sprint, again, inspect on those experiments. At all times, we want to look at what we call the definition of done. Now, I mentioned early on that our objective from each sprint is to produce done software. Well, we should make that clear. What does that mean? When we get into the sprint review, we want to tell everybody, here's what we've done. Here's how we've produced this. Here's how we're sustaining agility. All right? They should understand that this has been code reviewed. This has been, we've run static analysis on the code. This has been tested by a certain number of type of user. We've run through these load tests. We've had the copy reviewed. It's available in 3 languages. We want to have an explicit, clear definition of done that everyone understands throughout the organization so they know what they're really getting. This is a part of that transparency thing. Retrospectives will often come out with an expanded definition of done, an opportunity to increase the quality ongoing of our product. So we had 5 events. We had this overall container called the sprint. The sprint starts off immediately with sprint planning. After sprint planning, every 24 hours we're going to have a just-in-time planning event called the daily Scrum. We're going to end with a sprint review and finally a sprint retrospective, our formal opportunity to inspect. Sprints are always going to be back-to-back. If you find that you're having time between sprints because you need to take a breath, catch up, maybe you were rushing through the sprint, that's something that we want to explicitly inspect on in a retrospective. We want sustainable sprints. We should not feel exhausted when we leave a sprint and come into the next, so they should be back-to-back. All right. Let's take a look at artifacts, the things that we might produce or do as a part of Scrum. There's actually not very many. We talked about one of them, the product backlog. This isn't terribly complicated. It's actually a very simple concept in Scrum, unlike many other methodologies. It's simply an ordered list of things we want to do. And that idea that this is an ordered list, a simple ordered list, is actually very powerful. By requiring that things be stepwise, one on top of another, it becomes relatively clear which one's more important than another, as well as what part of what's going to be happening next. When we measure what we're able to do out of a sprint, we can apply that to this ordered list and do some really simple arithmetic to come up with forecasts. And you should be expecting forecasts. The product backlog is never done. There's always something new to do with a product. If there isn't, well, maybe the product's done. But we want this product backlog to be constantly evolving because we want it to be completely transparent and open. Everyone should be able to add new items to your product backlog. We have a really simple way of deciding whether or not something gets done or not. We move it to the bottom of the list. Now, over time, you may groom that. Groom the bottom of the list, take things out that are never going to happen. But you definitely want to make sure that those things that are at the top of the list are better understood than maybe the things at the bottom. The things at the bottom may just be a title. Here, if we look at this screenshot here of Team Foundation Server 2012, the web access, the web edition of their product backlog tools and Agile planning tools, you see change page layout. We may know that something is not in a good format on our website, and so we say change page layout and we add it to our product backlog. As that thing moves up and becomes more likely to occur in the next sprint, we're going to understand more about that. We may talk to the people who care about the page layout of our homepage, for instance. Talk to marketing. Do some Google Analytics to understand what type of browsers people are using. Those things at the bottom, we're okay with those not being quite as clear. We want to make sure that everything on the backlog is estimated. That's part of grooming the backlog. You can't forecast things unless you estimate it. We want to estimate these things, if at all possible, in relative sizing because it makes it much easier to forecast when we have relative sizing. We talk about that and we actually practice that in the Professional Scrum Foundations and Professional Scrum Developer courses, how to estimate in a relative fashion, which is different than estimating in a duration or a time unit. Once we've got our product backlog and we've gone through sprint planning, out of sprint planning comes this idea of a sprint backlog. We talked about a forecast, a goal, and a plan to deliver or a plan to execute on that goal and that forecast. That's what the sprint backlog is. It's those selected product backlog items that we're going to do in this sprint and a plan to deliver on them. The development team who's self-organizing, deciding on how to deliver on that work, is going to own the sprint backlog. This is for them. It's really useful, really important that you have this be very visible, very clear. I should be able to walk by it and in a few seconds understand how do we feel and how do we sit with this sprint? What are we looking at as far as our forecast is concerned? Are we on track? Are we not on track? Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to do to get us back on track? These are all different types of questions that should be easily asked of our visualization. You're looking here at Team Foundation Server's sprint backlog or board, planning board for Sprint 1 in Web Access, their Agile planning tools. One of the other things that we want to be able to ask out of this is how much work is remaining? I'm not as concerned on here, it's for another tool, about how much work has been completed. I'm more concerned about what's remaining. What do I need to do to get to that done increment for the sprint review? You may certainly have time tracking and all those types of things, but that's not what the sprint backlog is about explicitly. All right, so we talked about a number of different things. First off, we talked about the fact that Scrum is an empirical process or an empirical framework. That is, it uses past experiences to understand where we are and what's going to happen in the future, to gain knowledge. It's not a traditional process which might be predictive in nature. Scrum stands on this concept of transparency at all levels. As a Scrum Master, as a development team member, and as a product owner, we need to embody that idea of transparency, not only when it's easy or when it makes us happy or everybody else happy, but also when it's hard, so that we can inspect and adapt. Finally, in 30 days or less, we want to be producing done software. We aren't producing partially done software. We're producing stuff that might or could be potentially shipped if it's accrued enough value to the product owner's discretion. So the question becomes, where do we go from here? We've got this brief kind of surface level understanding of what Scrum is. We talked about where Agile came from and what it is and how Scrum and Agile align. There's a couple of things you can do. First off, from scrum.org explicitly, we have an open assessment. What that means is it's open to everyone. So it's a gauge in what your Scrum knowledge is today. It's free. It's about 30 questions. It shouldn't take you more than 30 minutes. I would imagine probably 15 to 20 minutes. And what it does is it gives you an understanding, hey, do I really know what Scrum is based on the Scrum guide that you can find out at scrum.org. From that, you can decide, hey, my Scrum implementation is healthy. Maybe it's not healthy. Maybe I need to go and research some more, read the Scrum guide again. The Scrum guide is out there on scrum.org. It's 17 pages. That includes title pages, pictures and notes from the authors, and index. It's really more like 13 pages of real meat. Finally, there's courses, webcasts, a community forum, ask your questions. Those are all available out on scrum.org. From Applied Information Sciences and Max, we've got a Professional Scrum Foundations course coming up on October 10th and 11th. It's a 2-day course. During this 2-day course, we talk about these types of things. We go into the theory behind a lot of the topics we talked about today, the statistical process control, the human portion of these types of things like Tuckman's levels of or stages of group development. We talk about a lot of that stuff, the theory. We also practice Scrum. So you're going to go through 4 sprints in the class and actually produce some software as a team with the Scrum framework in mind. Now, if you want to find out more about what the Scrum Foundations course is like, we're actually going to be talking about it, have another webcast called What is Professional Scrum Foundations? That's going to be on September 10th, or September 27th. You can find both of these at these short links. So the What is PSF, you can find that at bit.ly/whatispsf. And then you can also find the Professional Scrum Foundations. You can find both of these at maxtrain.com. All right, Terry, I'm going to turn it back to you. We have some questions, hopefully.
If you have any questions, you're welcome to go ahead and drop them in the question box, and we will get those over to Ryan. I'm not seeing any so far.
I see one here from Roger Vaught. What software tools are available to implement projects using Scrum, TFS? Certainly Team Foundation Server is one of them. Rally has some tools that are nice out there. If you're a Jira shop, there's a tool called Greenhopper. There's quite a few of them. There's a lot of tools out there. My suggestion to you, try practicing Scrum at a small level, maybe with physical tools, translating those types of things back to whatever tools are necessary for you guys. A lot of organizations have federal or state or industry standards for traceability and things along that line. A lot of these tools provide it, but it's a relatively decent investment. Team Foundation Server has an incredibly low investment for those teams that are already using Visual Studio. If you guys have an MSDN license in your organization, you already own Team Foundation Server, and you can get up and going. You can also go to tfspreview.com and try out all of the screenshots and Team Foundation Server for free. today. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to contact me. My information will be coming up. I can give you a walkthrough on what that looks like. Hopefully that answered your question, Roger. If not, throw another one up there.
I think, Ryan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, this is how much is the 2-day course per person? That's a great question. And I think it's 9. I don't want to misquote that, so I'm going to look that up right now.
BJ, we'll get that one for you, and we'll answer that here in a second. There's another question here. What are the minimum size of projects, total time frame, team dev size, etc.? We're using full Scrum becomes useful. Scrum actually has a constraint, and actually that's how Scrum works in a lot of ways. It works through constraints of a team that's 6 plus or minus 3. Okay. Now you may have many teams acting to deliver done software, and out of the sprint we want to have integrated done software from all of those teams where that applies. But each team we want to keep it to 6 plus or minus 3. Obviously that translates to 3 to 9. The reason we have that upper constraint of 9 is because at that point the connections necessary to self-organize are really, really hard. Okay. It's not linear, so you don't have 9 connections at that point, nine lines of communication. It's actually an exponential problem. And so there's been a number of studies, a number of pieces of information. The reason for the lower constraint is 3 is just because Scrum actually, you don't even need it. It's so small of a team, under 3, that you can just kind of almost wing it, if you will. Certainly Scrum as a framework is still useful, but it's not really useful at that point because the team is so small. Hopefully that makes sense.
And BJ, just real quick, your question with regards to the investment on a 2-day course is a $12.95 investment on a per student basis.
Tom, hopefully I answered your question. If not, let me know. Some of the other questions that sometimes come up with regards to Scrum. How do you mix a Scrum team with a waterfall team? That isn't an uncommon problem. You will likely have to do that, especially as you're adopting Scrum or adopting Agile principles and practices. You may have an external partner that does not work on a Scrum cadence, does not produce done software every month that you can practice or integrate into your product if you need that. And so you got to work with them, and you got to find ways of doing that. Scrum is not meant to give you all of these answers. What it is meant to do is give you a framework, this 30-day framework, in which you can try different things out, these experiments, and see what the impact of them are. Now, we don't want to necessarily pick a sprint length that's too short, because at that point we don't get enough information about what it means to implement that experiment. So we need to give it time to become natural to our system and to actually gather enough empirical evidence on its impact on our process. Now, you may also be an organization that has waterfall teams, or maybe they have constraints about contractual situations. We can work through a lot of those as well. Scrum does work in a fixed bid type of way, and we can work with you in the PSF how to understand how Scrum fits into a fixed bid or a fixed price contract situation. We are working with some federal contracts, federal organizations doing government contracts, GSA contracts, on how they can integrate Scrum into their organizations as well. The government itself is actually mandating for a number of their contracts some of these Agile principles of feedback, incremental iterative development. So all of this are topics that we talk about in Professional Scrum Foundations and Professional Scrum Developer. If we don't have any more questions, I do want to thank you all for coming today, spending your lunch with us. You can get a hold of me at ryan.cromwell@appliedis.com. You can also find me out at cromwellhouse.com. That's my blog, and then out on Twitter, spending way too much time talking about things. And then, of course, Applied IS has our blog out there as well, where we'll talk about our ALM experience and things along that line. And then the maxtrain.com has a place where you can register for the next What is PSF as well as the PSF course. Terry, I'll turn it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks again for being with us today and for your insight. Looks like that's it for the questions today. I want to thank everybody again for attending and taking time out of your lunch hour to be with us. As always, feel free to call us here at Max Technical Training. You can reach us, of course, at 513-322-8888. And then, as Ryan had mentioned earlier, you can always find us at maxtrain.com. And we look forward to having you back with us again. Thanks again, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.